The champagne flutes clinked around me like tiny bells tolling my humiliation. I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom, watching my father, General Marcus Blackwood, hold court at his retirement ceremony, his new wife Elena beaming beside him with her 18-year-old daughter Sophie clinging to his arm like she'd found her hero. Alexander was always the disappointment, I heard him say to a cluster of decorated officers, his voice carrying across the room with military precision. Couldn't cut it in the academy, couldn't handle real responsibility. Good thing I have Sophie now. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. She's got the spine he never had. The laughter that followed felt like shrapnel. 28 years old, and I was still that scared kid who never measured up to his impossible standards. The same kid who'd been kicked out of military school not for lack of ability, but for questioning orders I knew were wrong. The same kid who'd watched his mother waste away while his father prioritized his career over her chemotherapy appointments. Sophie giggled and looked in my direction with poorly concealed disdain. At 18, she already carried herself with the entitled confidence of someone who'd never known real struggle, never earned anything through blood and sacrifice. My father had been married to her mother for barely 2 years, yet she called him Daddy, with the kind of devotion that should have taken decades to build. "Alex!" My father's voice boomed across the room. "Come here, son. Tell Colonel Martinez about your little security job." The emphasis on little cut deep. Every eye in the room turned to me as I approached, my dress uniform suddenly feeling like a costume. I'd worn it hoping to remind him that I'd served too, that I'd found my own path even after he'd written me off. "Alexander works private security now," my father announced to the group, that familiar disapproving tone creeping into his voice. "Quite a step down from the family tradition, but we all find our level, don't we?" Colonel Martinez, a man I remembered from my childhood as one of my father's closest friends, shifted uncomfortably. "Private security can be quite lucrative, Marcus. Important work." "Oh, it's fine work for someone suited to it," Elena chimed in, her smile sharp as a blade. "Not everyone can handle the pressure of real military leadership." Sophie nodded sagely, as if her 2 years as my father's stepdaughter had given her deep insights into military service. "Some people just aren't cut out for greatness." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. I'd moved beyond that years ago. This was calculation, assessment, the same ice-cold clarity that had served me well in situations they couldn't even imagine. "You're absolutely right," I said quietly, meeting my father's eyes. "Not everyone is cut out for greatness." Something in my tone must have registered because his expression flickered, just for a moment. Then Sophie was pulling him away to meet some admiral, and I was alone again, with the bitter taste of public humiliation fresh on my tongue. 3 days later, I was back in my real world. Not the sanitized, protocol-driven environment of military bureaucracy, but the shadows where real power moved and real decisions were made. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made me smile for the first time since the retirement ceremony. "Operation Nightfall approved. Full authority granted. Congratulations, General Stone." General Stone. My operational name for the past 5 years, known only to a select few in the intelligence community. While my father had been playing politics and climbing the conventional ladder, I'd been recruited by a joint task force that operated in the spaces between official channels. The kind of work that didn't come with ribbons and ceremonies, but kept the world from falling apart in ways the public would never know. The mission was elegant in its simplicity. A terrorist cell had been planning something big, and we'd finally identified their financial network. The operation would span multiple countries and require coordination between agencies that officially didn't cooperate. It was the kind of high-stakes, politically sensitive work that had earned me my rank in an organization that didn't technically exist. What made it particularly interesting was the location of the final phase, right here in the city where my father had just retired, where he was no doubt planning to enjoy his golden years playing golf and basking in the adoration of his new family. I was reviewing intelligence reports when my secure phone rang. Director Harrison's voice was crisp and all business. General Stone, we have a complication. The target has made contact with someone in your area. A young woman, college-aged. We believe she's being used as an unwitting courier. My blood chilled as he read off the description. Blonde, 5'6", economics major at the local university. Frequents coffee shops downtown. Lives with her mother and stepfather, a retired Army general. Sir, I said carefully, can you confirm the identity? Sophie Blackwood. Mean anything to you? The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. 2 days later, I watched from a surveillance van as Sophie met with a man our intelligence had identified as Viktor Kozlov, a mid-level operative in the network we'd been tracking. She was laughing at something he said, completely oblivious to the fact that the thumb drive she'd just handed him contained information that could get a lot of people killed. She has no idea, Agent Chen observed from the passenger seat. Classic honey trap. They're using her to move intelligence because she has access to military social functions through her stepfather. What kind of access? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Chen consulted his tablet. Retirement parties, officer gatherings, that sort of thing. She's been photographing documents, taking pictures with people. Standard social engineering, but effective. Through the scope, I watched Sophie check her phone and smile. Whatever Victor had promised her, money, adventure, romance, she was completely taken in. The naive girl who'd stood beside my father and mocked my little security job was now an asset in a terrorist operation. The tactical part of me saw the elegant solution immediately. We could move in, arrest her along with Victor, and use the intelligence to roll up the entire network. Clean, efficient, and completely devastating to my father's reputation. The man who'd spent his career lecturing others about security and proper vetting would be revealed as someone who couldn't even protect his own family from recruitment by foreign operatives. But as I watched Sophie laugh at Victor's jokes, I realized something else. This wasn't really about her. This was about choice. The same choice my father had refused to give me when I'd questioned orders I knew were wrong. The same choice he'd denied my mother when he'd prioritized his career over her final months. Agent Chen, I said, I need you to take the team and maintain surveillance on Victor. I'm going to have a conversation with the asset. Sir? That's not protocol. No, I agreed. It's not. Sophie was walking alone through the university campus when I approached her. She looked up with that same dismissive expression she'd worn at the retirement party, clearly not recognizing me out of uniform. Sophie Blackwood? I asked. Yes? Her tone was wary now, something in my bearing triggering her self-preservation instincts. My name is General Stone. We need to talk. The blood drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Viktor Kozlov, the thumb drives, the information you've been photographing at your stepfather's social events. I kept my voice level, professional. You're in a great deal of trouble, Sophie. She tried to run. I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was how young she looked when I caught up to her, how her bravado crumbled the moment she realized she was caught. I didn't know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He said it was just information for his research paper. About military culture. I thought I was helping him with school. Viktor Kozlov is 43 years old, Sophie. He hasn't been in school for 20 years. The full weight of her situation hit her then. She collapsed onto a bench, sobbing with the kind of raw terror that only comes from realizing you've been utterly and completely used. "What happens to me now?" she asked. I studied her face. Young, frightened, genuinely remorseful. Nothing like the smug girl who'd stood beside my father and dismissed my life's work. Nothing like the entitled princess who'd looked down on me for not living up to the family name. "That depends," I said, "on what you're willing to do to fix this." The plan I laid out for her was risky, requiring her to continue contact with Victor while feeding him false information we would provide. She would wear a wire, attend meetings, and help us build the case we needed to dismantle the entire network. In exchange, her cooperation would be noted, and with luck, she might avoid serious prison time. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as we finished going over the details. "Because someone should have helped you before you got this deep," I replied. "And because you remind me of someone I used to know." Over the next 2 weeks, Sophie proved herself more capable than I'd given her credit for. She followed instructions precisely, asked intelligent questions, and showed real courage in situations that would have terrified more experienced operatives. Under the pressure, the entitled facade fell away, revealing someone with genuine strength underneath. The night of the final operation, I watched from the command center as she met with Victor one last time. The information she carried would lead him directly into our trap while simultaneously exposing the entire network. 27 arrests across 4 countries, millions in terrorist funding seized, and a plot to attack civilian targets completely neutralized. "Outstanding work, General," Director Harrison said as we watched the final suspects being taken into custody. "This one's going in the history books." "What about the girl?" I asked. "Clean record, full immunity. She did good work." That night, Sophie called me from her mother's house. Her voice was shaky but determined. "I want to tell him," she said. "My stepfather. I want to tell him what really happened, what I did, and what you did to help me." "Sophie, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. He deserves to know who you really are." The next evening, I found myself back in my father's house for the first time in 3 years. Elena answered the door, her usual condescending smile faltering when she saw me. "Alexander? We weren't expecting—" "I invited him, Mom." Sophie appeared beside her, looking somehow older than she had just days before. "We need to talk. All of us." My father emerged from his study, his expression guarded. "Alexander, what's this about?" Sophie looked at me, took a deep breath, and began to speak. She told them everything. About Victor, about the intelligence operation, about how close she'd come to being arrested as a foreign agent. She told them about my role, about the organization I really worked for, about the rank I'd earned in service they'd never even known existed. The silence that followed stretched on forever. "You're a general?" my father finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "For 5 years," I confirmed. "General Stone, Joint Task Force 7. We handle situations that are too sensitive for conventional military response." Elena was staring at me with something approaching horror. "You could have arrested her? You could have destroyed our family." "Yes," I said simply. "I could have." Sophie stepped forward, her young face serious in a way that reminded me of myself at her age. "But he didn't. He saved me instead. He taught me how to fix what I'd broken, how to make it right. He gave me a chance to be better." My father's eyes were fixed on me, and for the first time in my adult life, I couldn't read his expression. "Why?" he asked. "After what I said at the retirement ceremony, after how I've treated you all these years, why would you protect her?" The answer came easily, surprising me with its simplicity. "Because she's family," I said. "And because someone needed to show her that making mistakes doesn't make you worthless. That failing once doesn't define who you are forever." Something shifted in my father's face then. For just a moment, the mask of the commanding officer fell away, and I saw the man underneath. older, more fragile than I'd realized, carrying his own weight of regret. "I failed you," he said quietly. "I was so focused on making you strong that I forgot to make you feel loved." "You made me strong enough to survive it," I replied. "Strong enough to become someone who could save your daughter when she needed it." Sophie moved to stand beside me then, not between us, but somehow bridging the gap that had existed for so long. "He's not just a general," she said to my father, her voice filled with a pride that caught me off guard. "He's a hero. The kind that saves people instead of destroying them. The kind that chooses mercy when they could choose revenge." Elena was crying now, the full weight of what had almost happened to her daughter finally hitting her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for what I said, for how we treated you." "You saved her life." "She saved her own life," I corrected. "I just gave her the tools to do it." My father stood up slowly, his age showing in the careful way he moved. He walked over to where I stood and, for the first time since I was a child, pulled me into his arms. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have said it years ago, but I'm proud of the man you've become." As we stood there in his living room, four people who'd found their way back to each other through the strangest possible circumstances, I realized that this was what victory really looked like. Not the destruction of your enemies, but the rebuilding of what you thought was lost forever. Sophie was right. I could have chosen revenge. I could have let her fall. Could have used her mistakes to humiliate the man who'd spent my childhood making me feel small. Instead, I'd chosen something harder and infinitely more rewarding. I'd chosen to be the father I'd always wished I'd had. 3 months later, I stood in another ballroom, this one celebrating Sophie's acceptance into the military academy. She wore her candidate's uniform with a pride that reminded me of myself at that age, before the weight of my father's expectations had taught me to doubt my own worth. "I want to be like you," she'd told me during one of our weekly dinners that had become tradition. "Not a general necessarily, but someone who makes things better instead of just following orders." My father approached, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. He moved carefully these days, the stress of the past months having aged him visibly, but his smile was genuine. "To Sophie," he said, raising his glass, "and to second chances." "To family," I replied, watching Sophie laugh with some of the other candidates across the room. "The one we're born into, and the one we choose." As we drank, I caught sight of my reflection in the ballroom mirrors, a man in dress uniform, surrounded by family, finally at peace with the choices that had brought him here. Not the bitter, angry son who'd stood in similar ballrooms nursing his grievances, but someone who'd learned that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's transforming them into family. My father cleared his throat, drawing my attention back to him. "There's something I want to give you," he said, pulling a small box from his jacket pocket. Inside was a pair of stars, general's insignia from his own uniform. "I never got to pin these on you officially," he said, "but I'd like to now, if you'll let me." As he fastened the stars to my collar, I felt the weight of all the years between us, the arguments, the disappointments, the stubborn pride that had kept us apart. But I also felt something else. The possibility of a future where my father's approval wasn't something I needed, but something I was grateful to have. "There," he said, stepping back to look at his work. "Now you look like the general you've always been." Across the room, Sophie caught my eye and smiled, the real smile of someone who'd learned that strength isn't about never falling down, but about what you choose to do when you get back up. I smiled back, thinking about the strange path that had brought us all here. From humiliation to revenge to redemption. All because I'd chosen to see potential instead of failure, possibility instead of blame. Sometimes the best revenge is refusing to need it at all.